Make the magic happen for me, Joe. I want to, when I post on LinkedIn, I want like copious follows and likes and comments, and I'm dying to hear about this. You have said that the real reason a lot of us don't post on LinkedIn isn't time or skill, it's confidence, right? What's driving that hesitation? How can communicators start to overcome the fear of putting themselves, out there without being criticized in a cancel culture?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're quite unusual in that we work almost exclusively with individuals rather than brands. So we don't really go near brand channels. We just work on a one-to-one basis, helping people to develop their strategy. We might do some training. We might even do ghostwriting for people. So we generally work with business leaders and business owners. And when they come to us for help, they often say that they don't have time for LinkedIn or they're not quite sure what to write. But actually, when you unpack it, it very often comes down to a lack of confidence. And we find that that's particularly acute with PR people. We're certainly we can write, we can do it really quickly. So those sort of stumbling blocks that might exist for some business leaders shouldn't exist for PR people. And yet we do all of those things sort of under the cover of a byline for somebody else. So typically we're writing for a stakeholder or a client. And actually writing something and putting our own names to it is something that feels quite scary. It's quite hard to kind of put your head above the parapet in that way. But my feeling is that it's really vital to build and maintain your personal network. PR is a people business through and through. And if we nurture our networks, then new opportunities will arise, whether it's your next client or your next hire or your next role for yourself. But if you don't kind of develop that network in a really intentional way, then there's fewer opportunities out there. I think to a degree, we all have to get over that kind of cringe factor that we feel around putting ourselves out there. I'm not comfortable right now, by the way, despite the team red jerseys that
If you're watching on YouTube, it's like we got together, right, and talked about. We didn't.
We really didn't. This is absolutely out of my comfort zone, but I'm viewing this recording as a means of helping some other people, rather than doing it because I like the sound of my own voice. And that's how I kind of overcome the cringe factor, if you like, is just kind of thinking, well, it's my role here to help others to maybe just come out into the limelight a little bit.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about authenticity. Sometimes you come across these LinkedIn posts and it's sort of like, my cat died over the weekend and this is what it taught me about B2B marketing. And you see these sort of clumsy segues. And I wanted to talk about authenticity versus, bringing your sort of personal side to your content. And there's often confusion between the two. How could PR professionals really strike that right balance between bringing personality into their content, but without oversharing or losing professionalism?
Yeah, I think we saw a real rise in the amount of personal content that was being shared on LinkedIn during COVID, during the lockdowns when we couldn't get out and see other people. So we kind of came together on social media. We were all sort of sailing similar boats through the same storm. And it became perfectly acceptable to kind of share the chaos of what was going on at work and at home. But, fast forward a few years and we're back to in-person meetings and we've got return to office mandates and all of the rest of it. And there's been a bit of a backlash against that personal content. And as you say, there are some really clumsy segues between, my dad died or my cat died and this is what it's taught me. So I think it's, many people feel it's not the place for sharing that kind of personal story. But I do think there's still a dire need for content with personality, and I think there's a bit of a difference. And to kind of illustrate that point, I'm working on a sales navigator project for a client where we're targeting senior marketing professionals in the tech sector. And 95% of what they're writing is, read this white paper that, has come from my business, or, look at these insights from my boss in some trade magazine, or come to this webinar. And it's dull, it's horrendously boring. And they're doing it to tick a box for their employer, but it's not telling their network anything about themselves. So, what's their point of view? What do they actually think? What's going to make the people in their network want to work for them? Because it sure as hell isn't that. So I think that there is real scope for content that is about your thoughts individually, not those of the brand. And we can definitely add personality without getting too personal.
I'm a big believer that women are judged way differently than men, and more harshly. A woman is too harsh, or she's too soft, right? And there's no Goldilocks there, and men get the benefit of the doubt. And that's not just men judging women, that's women judging women. To succeed here, you have to put yourself out there. In this case, we're talking about LinkedIn, but just in general, you got to put yourself out there. You do need to be a bit of self-promotional. I use POP all the time in my mind, proof of performance. It's okay to do it. You got to make sure others know that you did it. So particularly for women, how do you put yourself out there so that you're noticed and not be seen as showing off? How do you wear red in a public society so that you stand out, but not everybody comments that you're wearing red?
Yeah. I've seen a couple of reports lately that I found really interesting. There was some socially mobile and CIPR research here in the UK that revealed that while two-thirds of women below director two-thirds of PR professionals below director level are women, only 46% of senior roles are held by women. So there's this sort of quiet exodus in midlife. I think it's absolutely tragic that, women that are at the top of their professional game just kind of vanish. In a sense, I'm one of them. I left the PR industry world, in my 40s and my early 40s once I'd had 2 kids, because it was just too difficult. And I think, many senior women are feeling quite vulnerable for various reasons in midlife. Lots of us are sandwiched between kids that still need us and parents that maybe need us a bit more. There's perimenopause. There's a sense of feeling somewhat invisible anyway, I think, with all of these competing demands on your own time and maybe not having enough time to yourself. Or maybe I saw you covered, Fazana, on the Week Unspun, that the comment about being somebody doing some CIPR research being called grandma in a meeting.
Yeah.
Jenny Manchester.
Yeah, that's it. Jenny Manchester. Yeah. I used to get called mum in my mid-30s in an agency. So, and I think it was a term of endearment. I like to think so, but I'm not sure I'd like to be called grandma. That's for sure.
Nobody's calling me daddy at work, I can tell you that.
No, exactly. So, I think it is hard for women. And I think actually making a decision to be visible is harder for women anyway, at any age. Because of that fear of judgment. And we talked about this last week. I'm reminded of that America Ferrera, that iconic speech in the Barbie movie about how women can't win. And in this case, to paraphrase, we've got to be visible or we'll be overlooked, but we mustn't brag, but we mustn't be performative, but we mustn't be too much. There's this kind of sense that we can't quite win, and that further erodes confidence. But I think that women have so much to give in terms of, particularly in later life, in terms of knowledge and experience and empathy and understanding and advice. And in a world where I feel like kindness is in short supply, really, in many respects, we need good people to be visible. And we need good people to stand up and be an example for a younger generation of, future PR leaders, if you like, that are coming through, because we can't be what we can't see.
That's such a good point. Jo, a lot of people have sort of dived into LinkedIn 2 reasons. One is you've had an exodus from X. And then all of a sudden, well, where do we go? And they've sort of moved into LinkedIn. And then the second, those people who are nervous to write or don't have the time or don't have the headspace, now they've got sort of ChatGPT and the other LLMs, and they're producing all this content on LinkedIn. What practical advice would you give to someone who's listening, who knows they need to do more on LinkedIn, but they just don't know the basics? Like, how many times should they post on LinkedIn a week? Is it, is what's too much? What's too little? What do the algorithms favor? Where do you lose points from the algorithm? Can you game the algorithm? And is it sort of you have to put video more than sort of copy? Should it be a long post, a short post? Should you have texture, so the odd long post and then sometimes shorts, and mix it all up? I mean, what advice would you give to somebody who's just doesn't know where to start and they just want some tips from an expert like you who's honed your expertise over many years?
Yeah. Okay. I think, well, the first thing I would say is be strategic about it. So if you were doing this for a client, you would determine aims and objectives. You would look at audiences. You would create content pillars. You would measure. You would treat it like you would any other kind of PR program. And I think that you need to do that for yourself. It's not that comfortable, perhaps. And I think, when we start using the terms like personal brand and building your personal brand and so on, people are quite uncomfortable with that. But if you think about it as just raising your professional profile, then that's the way to do it. It's a really, that planning bit is a really vital part of being intentional about building that profile. So that would be my starting point. I think keep adding to your network. You never know kind of where those opportunities are going to come from. So, absolutely connect with people after meetings, connect with people that you've heard speak at events, perhaps connect with people that are talking about some of the same issues that you're talking about. I don't get hung up on, to your point, Doug, earlier on about the metrics in and of themselves. I think, you can have tens of thousands of followers or connections, but you can't maintain meaningful conversations with all of those people. So I think it's about connecting with the right people that kind of, are kind of within your wheelhouse, if you like. So I would say absolutely keep building that network. And then I would be thinking about how to develop that network by commenting a lot on other people's stuff. So I think I'm very wary of people that say you must post every day. I think very few of us have enough to say every single day of the week that's interesting or relevant. So I kind of aim for once a week, but I kind of, there's a ratio of sort of one post to about 10 comments. As I think the comments are really, really important, because that's where the conversation happens, and that's where the relationships really, we can really develop the relationships. I think the other thing is that sends a signal to, and by the way, you should be, obviously, you've done your plan, so you should be thinking about commenting on, the topics that are, within your plan, so that you've decided that you want to be known for. Those comments will start to show up in other people's feeds, in your connections feeds, and also it will help to tell the algorithm what you're interested in. So anything that if you're spending time looking at posts, if you're scrolling through carousels, if you're reacting and commenting, that they're all signals to the algorithm that you're interested in that subject matter. So the more you do that, the more that helps the feed become very relevant to you. But also, if you're targeted about your engagement, and you're, say there's a prospect has written something, if you comment on their post, they're far more likely on Tuesday, they're far more likely to see your post on Wednesday, because there's a degree of timeliness about who sees your post, because your post doesn't get served to everybody in your network. It will be served to, say, 5%. But that 5% will include people that you've recently connected with, people you've recently direct messaged, and people you've recently engaged with. So, again, it's about being strategic and intentional. So it's not just going for the easy comments, the person you worked with 10 years ago that's got a new job, congrats, mate. It's about adding your insight and your thoughts, and really kind of extending that conversation and developing that network.
How do I drive them to my white paper, though? If that's my whole thing, is I'm trying to drive them to my website or because I've heard if I put the link in, and I'm pulling people out of the social media app, that the algorithm smacks me on the backside and diminishes my views or impressions.
Yeah, LinkedIn doesn't love links any more than any other social media platform because they
It's
really
linked
want.
out when you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, they want to keep you within the platform if possible. So I would always say when you're, uploading video clips and so on, to do that natively rather than sending people off to YouTube or Vimeo to watch the stuff. We do use links, of course we do, because sometimes it's just about making it as easy as possible for the reader to engage and access the information you're trying to share. There are different ways of doing it. You asked about formats, Fazana, and I definitely think it's worth mixing things up a bit. Short posts, long posts, articles, video. And video. None of this stuff needs to be professionally produced. In fact, I think sometimes that can be a bit of a turn off to people because people like that natural, authentic content. They like to see the faces of the people that they have worked with or that they'd like to work with. It's much easier to engage with somebody on a human level if you're seeing their face and you can hear their voice. And it doesn't matter if it's just an iPhone video or a snap taken at a show or an event. People are much more, it's a kind of human nature thing. People are much more likely to engage with that. So yeah, I would definitely mix up the formats. Definitely do your commenting. Ideally do that. At the sort of around the time you're posting as well, because that will really help just to show you're active on the platform.
And that I want to ask Joe about timing. When's the best time? Is there a best time? Is there a best day to post?
Yeah, I think I still subscribe to the sort of couple of golden hours first thing in the morning, sort of 8 till 10 a.m., because I think those are times when people are likely to be traveling and logging in. So you really want for that initial sample of people to see your LinkedIn post and to engage with it immediately, and then it will go further. I think what we are seeing, and there have been the LinkedIn algorithms, in the plural, there are multiple algorithms at play. They have changed over the last few months, and that's caused a degree of consternation amongst LinkedIn users that are quite active on the platform, because suddenly posts that were getting thousands and thousands of views and impressions, it's kind of gone down into the hundreds. I think what's interesting about that is actually engagement rates have remained relatively level, which you could argue means that LinkedIn is just better at showing your content to the people that are most likely to engage. But again, it comes down to it's what you do in terms of engagement that will help your stuff to go further.
So the app is doing that because if I'm constantly seeing stuff in my feed that I'm not interested in, I'm more likely to leave the app. That's why the app itself is trying to refine the algorithm so that it's more target. Yeah.
Yeah,
Makes
exactly
sense.
that. And if you allow yourself to be drawn into, there is polarization of content on LinkedIn, just like there is on any other platform at the moment. And I think if you allow yourself to be drawn into reading stuff that you don't actually really want to read, but you're kind of drawn to it, you'll see more of it because you've spent
Right.
time reading that thing. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to, you sort of get back the content you deserve in a sense. So you kind of got to be thinking about how you engage and how you interact with
Yeah.
it so that you're showing it the right signals.
I'd make the argument if all I see is red in my feed, I ought to get some blue. Otherwise,
Yeah.
all I'm ever going to see is red, right? I'm going to go deeper into red. Joe, really
Yeah,
appreciate
exactly.
your time today.
Thank
This
you.
was
Yeah.
fantastic.
Mm.
Yeah.